Hi, it is Monday, May the 11th, and our devotion for this day is part devotion and part Bible study. And our text comes from the book of Joshua, chapter 3. Early in the morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set out from Shittim and went to the Jordan River, where they camped before crossing over. After 3 days, the officers went throughout the camp, giving orders to the people. When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and follow it. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so that they know that I am with you, as I was with Moses. Tell the priests who carry the ark of the covenant, when you reach the edge of the Jordan's waters, go and stand in the river." So when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is flooded and at flood stage all during harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the Ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the water flowing down to the sea of Arabah, the Salt Sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite Jericho. The priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground. Here ends the reading. Thanks be to God. And the devotion today was written by Alistair Groves. After they left Egypt, the people of Israel wandered in the wilderness for decades. When they finally arrived on the doorstep of the Promised Land, they faced one last obstacle to entry, the Jordan River. You know how the story goes. The priests carry the ark into the river, and once their feet get wet, the waters part, and the people walk across on dry land. God repeats the miraculous provision of deliverance their parents had experienced a generation ago at the Red Sea. What we can easily miss, however, is a little detail in the first 2 verses of Joshua chapter 3, and it's this. The people had to camp and wait at the river's edge for 3 days, without knowing what was coming next or how they would cross. What's it like to sit in your tent watching a river at flood stage churning by? What's it like to watch your children playing outside, knowing they're going to have to somehow cross this engorged river flooded with dark, flood-stirred sediment? What's it like to look at your sheep, your donkeys, all of your precious possessions and heirlooms that were carried all the way from Egypt, all that represents your life savings, and wonder if you might lose it all? How does it feel to know that God is calling you to move forward, that He is promising to be with you, but that all you can actually see is a river whose depth you do not know, but of whose fatal power you can be sure? It's an easy parallel for us to make today, isn't it? A virus is racing across the world. God is calling us to continue forward in love of our neighbor and in service to God's kingdom. But all we can see are public surfaces potentially covered with germs, people who may be walking vectors of disease. Because of these parallels between then and now, it's striking to reflect on what God didn't do at the Jordan. God could have, but didn't, pick up His people in a mighty whirlwind and deposit them on the far side of the river the moment they got there. God could have, but didn't, part the Jordan so that it was waiting for the people when they arrive, perhaps with ground dried and a scattering of grass and lilies down the center of the people's path. God could have, but didn't, simply ask the people to swim and float across, seeing to it that everyone made it safely, and every sheep and gold earring was accounted for. These all would have been equally miraculous and effective ways of carrying God's children to their new home. Instead, God chose for his people to wait and watch the flood, inviting them to trust God and all that crossing that flood might mean. God often calls us to wait in the presence of our enemies, doesn't he? God often comes to our aid later and in different ways than we would like. We most like to hear stories about dramatic rescues and incredible miracles of rescue from dire situations, but we most like to experience stories where God provides in boring, safe, and predictable ways, like full bank accounts, good health, and so on. God knows we need to be reminded of our dependence on him over and over again throughout our lives. Few reminders are more vivid or visceral than waiting by flooded rivers, or spending the night in the lion's den, or waiting in the Garden of Gethsemane while your rabbi pours out his soul and his sweat in anguished prayer, knowing that there are dangerous men who want to arrest him and you. God knows that these reminders of our dependence are frightening and place profound strain on us, even when things turn out well in the end. That's why God shows us that we can trust God and wait on him. God has been the people's helper over and over and over again through the millennia, and God will help us no matter what may come. How then do we wait on God well, specifically in the face of a global pandemic? Well, certainly not by simply pretending that everything will be okay. We don't know whether COVID-19 will end up as a minor inconvenience to our stock portfolio, or whether we will fall ill, or someone we love die. Waiting well in the face of the anxiety of a coming danger means taking seriously the reality of that danger. Our God takes our lives and our suffering very seriously indeed, and he, quote, does not willingly bring affliction or grief to anyone, unquote, because he cares for us and for the things we care for. That quote is from Lamentations chapter 3, verse 33. And when God calls us to go through the deep waters, he makes sure that the rivers of sorrow do not overflow. For though he brings grief, he will show compassion. So great is his unfailing love. I'll close with one last thought about how you and I can wait on the banks of this river called pandemic, even as its flood is swelling. Pour out your anxieties to God. Don't churn fruitlessly inside your own heart with worries about school closings, travel plans, economic downturns, the potentially infected surfaces you may have touched, or the potentially infected people you've come in contact with. When you are afraid, turn to God. Cast your anxieties on God, because God cares for you. In fact, why not let hand washing or rubbing on hand sanitizer become a moment in which you consciously entrust yourself and the future of everyone you care about into God's hands? To spend our time frantically strategizing about how we'll cross the flooded river is so instinctive, even though it's also foolish and needless. So do wash your hands and do what is wise about working from home or calling your doctor. But don't let yourself forget for a moment where your true safety lies. After all, you don't know what tomorrow will bring, but you do know the one who parts the raging rivers and who has already parted the last river for you, blocking its flow with his blood-soaked cross. That final crossing to you will be open indeed and waiting for you. And on the far side of that river, you will fear and wait no more. And let all God's people say, Amen.